The progress we've made since those early dark days is really incredible.
Closer to a cure than ever before.
Because under living proof, it's possible to find a cure.
Another person said to be cured of HIV. This half hour, the breakthroughs targeting a virus that has killed 40 million people around the world in the past generation.
I got some kick in me. I'm gonna stay here for as long as I can.
This is Scripps News Reports, the cure for HIV. I'm Lauren Magarino in Atlanta. On tap for you this half hour, a heartfelt conversation about some news that will get your heart pumping. Scientists are closer to a cure for HIV than ever before. In fact, another person, a 60-year-old in Germany, is now said to be cured of the virus. He was diagnosed with HIV in 2009 and has now been off of his medication since 2018. 6 years later, the virus has not returned. An apparent cure. Once a miracle, it's now happening more often. But the big question here is how? The answer to that question will change lives. Nearly 40 million people around the world are now living with HIV, and of them, 30 million are on antiretroviral therapies, known as ART. And despite developments in preventing infections, 1 million people will be infected with HIV this year, and more than 600,000 people will die of HIV/AIDS. So waiting to join us are several guests who have been personally impacted by HIV. That includes Dr. Michael Gottlieb, who helped lead the study that first identified HIV/AIDS. Starting us off, Scripps News health and science correspondent Lindsay Thies. Lindsay, where does the story of HIV and a cure stand today?
Well, hey, Lauren, a cure for HIV has really been this hard thing to do because the virus replicates so fast. It's a constantly moving target. Doctors have now, though, used stem cell therapy to cure 7 patients, and new breakthroughs are adding to drugs that can prevent infections in the first place. 68-year-old Paul Edmonds inspires hope. He's lived with HIV for more than 3 decades. Doctors diagnosed him with leukemia in 2018. Now he's cured of both and spoke with Scripps News.
It was in March of 2021 when I stopped my HIV meds, and I'm still off of them. I test negative on everything.
Edmonds, sometimes referred to as the City of Hope patient, is one of 7 cured of or in remission for HIV. Each had a stem cell transplant where their own immune cells were replaced with those from donors with a rare genetic mutation that made the body resistant to most strains of HIV. In other words, cured.
We're going to find a cure for you because under living proof, it's possible to find a cure.
Last year, nearly 40 million people globally lived with HIV, with more than 1 million new cases recorded that year. Every year, fewer people are dying of HIV-related infection or the disease it causes, AIDS. Stem cell or bone marrow transplants for HIV are still risky and rare and haven't always worked. Advancements in widely accessible treatments have changed the game for patients since the first FDA-approved HIV drug AZT in 1987. Since then, the FDA has approved more than 40 HIV medications.
The medications from where I'm coming from the beginning, or it was like a night and day difference.
Treatment can also start before an infection in the first place, thanks to drugs known as PrEP. Patients can take a daily pill or a once-a-month injection, and scientists recently reported a massive development, a successful clinical trial where a twice-yearly injection prevented 100% of infections in the women who received it. The trial so successful, it was stopped early to offer the regimen to everyone involved.
We've seen how adherence is not always the greatest when it comes to the pill, purely because of different reasons, time, ability to go and fetch those pills from the clinics. And so with the injectable, and that's twice yearly, this gives a participant more choice.
The research will continue now in males. These developments are making a difference. The CDC's chief HIV medical officer tells Scripps News the agency has seen a 12% drop domestically in new HIV infections from 2018 to 2022, but says more progress is needed.
Here in the South, we have still got a very serious problem. In fact, the southern United States have accounted for over 50% of the new infections from the last reporting period. 20% of the infections reported to CDC in the last reporting period were in women. And among those women, 70% are Black or brown women. So this is a place where we really need to focus our attention.
Dr. John Brooks has treated HIV and AIDS patients since the beginning, and just like Edmonds, carries hope too.
I saw how horribly it affected people. I've seen this miraculous scientific advancement, and I've watched as a society, we have increasingly found ways to embrace people who may be having a greater chance of getting HIV or who have HIV, and to take care of them. We're going to see us get to the end of the HIV epidemic in America.
So, Lauren, here is what all of that means. HIV is no longer a death sentence, neither is AIDS. Today, the FDA says that a 20-year-old diagnosed with AIDS can live well into their late 70s with the help of antiretroviral therapies. That's nearly the same as the general population.
Wow, and that's the type of progress you want to hear about. I know, Lindsay, that the United Nations has a goal of ending the HIV/AIDS epidemic by 2030. It's 2024, so what's the plan to make that happen?
Well, this strategy here from the UN is largely built around preventing new infections and better access to the drugs that treat HIV. And when we talk about that access, it's not just getting a drug to someone who needs it, but really making that care itself easy to get. As Dr. Brooks with the CDC put it in our conversation, if you talk about someone who is concerned with children, with housing, their family, their own health conditions that might be more pressing, like their heart or their lungs, HIV is not necessarily high on that priority list. And that is where healthcare needs to meet these individuals.
Lindsay Thies in Los Angeles. Let's stay in Los Angeles as we bring in a doctor who was among the first in the world to identify HIV/AIDS. Dr. Michael Gottlieb joins us now with a resume too long to list. Doctor, you were a lead author at that study that first identified HIV/AIDS. You know, the year was 1981, and here we are 43 years later. How would you characterize the progress over those years to find a cure?
Well, Lauren, the progress over 45 years has been pretty near remarkable. As you pointed out earlier, people living with HIV who can access medication can live lives nearly as long as they would have if they hadn't had HIV. And that's very important to get access globally to people who need HIV medication. And we're doing well in that regard. Though there are probably 10 million or so people around the world with HIV who still can't access medication.
I mean, when you hear, okay, there's this 7th case of, potentially a cure here. I mean, how many more cases do you need like that to be like, you know what, we've got it? I mean, what are we waiting for at this point?
Well, I think it's very premature to say that we've got it. These are very special cases. These 7 cases are people who had HIV but had other cancers as well and got stem cell transplants and severe chemotherapy to eradicate their other cancer. And so, and they also got cells that were resistant, and in the stem cells that are resistant to infection by HIV. It's a very special case, but the fact of the matter is these people are cured of HIV. The first one was in 2007 with Timothy Ray Brown, who received a stem cell transplant. So it's a very special situation, but I would say, Lauren, it's a proof of principle that you can do it. But the idea of trying to scale up this kind of cure treatment for the 40 million people around the world infected with HIV just isn't realistic. But it's a clue. There may be other ways to get to this result.
I know you recently told People magazine that working in the field during the early years of this disease, you said it was very painful. You said that you nearly left medicine because it was so bad. You had signed too many death certificates, and that wasn't in the 1980s. It was in the mid-1990s. What was happening at that time?
Well, at that time, at least in Los Angeles and other large cities, we had units, which were called AIDS units, which were composed of 30-bed units, and they were all filled with usually young men dying of HIV with multiple infections. Their immune systems were really wiped out. And so one of the things that the newer HIV medications do is suppress the virus to undetectable level, allowing the immune system to recover and allow these people to be resistant to the infections that were killing them in the 90s. It's a whole different picture today than it was in the 80s and 90s.
I mean, that's exactly where I was going to go, because we have, guests standing by, including a woman who was HIV positive as a teenager, and she's been on medication. She's now married with 2 HIV negative children, and her virus is currently undetectable. So, I mean, when you call it a breakthrough and you go back to when you were first studying this virus in the 1980s, I mean, at the time, how unlikely was that kind of outcome? I mean, the fact that it exists now, but then, I mean, I don't know, just the juxtaposition of the two moments.
You're right. It was unlikely back then, and as you pointed out, it caused me back then to nearly lose hope. But science prevailed and developed medications that make it possible for this young woman to live a full life, have children, things that we thought back then might be impossible.
Well, Dr. Gottlieb, a lifetime of hard work that has saved countless lives. We appreciate your time and your insight on such an important conversation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
And next, a panel of powerful stories, from the person who ran President Biden's Office of AIDS Policy to the person who ran that same office under President Obama, and a woman in her 30s whose HIV is now undetectable. This is Scripps News Reports, The Cure for HIV.
Spending on AIDS has been one of the fastest growing parts of the budget. And ladies and gentlemen, it deserves to be.
Curing HIV has been a stated goal of every U.S. president since Ronald Reagan. And today, as we sit together, scientists are closer than ever to reaching that goal. And thanks to medication, millions of people who have tested positive for HIV are now living with levels that are simply undetectable. Ashley Kaysen is among them. The 31-year-old wife and mother of 2 is joining us. We're also joined by Harold Phillips. Harold was diagnosed in 2005 and ran President Biden's Office of National AIDS Policy. And Jeffrey Crowley is with us, too. He ran that same office under President Obama. Thank you all for joining us to really unpack this and at such a personal level. Ashley, I want to start with you first, because you are sharing your story with us. You're 31-year-old, diagnosed at the age of 15, and today, your partner is HIV negative, as are your kids. Is HIV still a factor in your daily life?
For me personally, yes and no. It is still a factor because I'm an advocate. Of course, I take my medications. So I have a constant reminder in visiting my doctor's appointments. So it definitely is still a factor. However, I have grown to look at the positive out of my situation and using my story and my testimony to help people, to help those that are newly diagnosed and those that are also living with HIV, to just be comfortable with who they are. You do not have to be defeated while living with HIV. You can do all the things that you want to do.
I mean, and that you said it, it's, a testament of your life. And I can see how stories like yours, I mean, make, Harold, I mean, you ran the White House Office of National AIDS Policy for 2.5 years, how important it is to hear these personal stories like Ashley's. What goes through your mind when you hear stories like hers?
I thank you, Lauren, for having me on the show. And also, Ashley is a testament to a lot of the work that has gone on, both in the government level, the clinic level, the community level, to put a human face to HIV. There is a lot of stigma regarding HIV, and she is a living testament to the success that we have had in both treating HIV and the fact that people with HIV can live long, healthy lives and have children and families and achieve their dreams and their goals. And when we developed the National HIV/AIDS Strategy as part of the work that I did on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration, it was really to do a couple of things, both increase awareness of HIV, the treatments that are available, as well as the prevention aspect, and to really and truly end HIV as a public health threat in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and Jeffrey, you're hearing that. You know that you led the development of our country's first domestic HIV/AIDS strategy, the one that has evolved through the administrations, as Harold was just talking about, and also Harold mentioning all these stakeholders that were part of this. So, Jeffrey, can you just take us inside that effort when it started and what has changed since, as it kind of got handed off to Harold?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, and I appreciate you spotlighting this important issue. So I would start with by saying that the HIV community was concerned that policymakers and the public was moving on from HIV. So before President Obama was elected, they, during the campaign, got a commitment from him, but also Senator McCain, to develop a national HIV/AIDS strategy. We require other countries to have them in our global AIDS program, PEPFAR. We didn't have one ourselves. And President Biden embraced that goal, and he said, we really have a lot of important things to do. We actually, there was the parallel effort to enact health reform, and so we learned from that, and they started out talking to the American people. And so we went around the country and held community discussions in 14 communities. We took online input from thousands of people across the country and said, what do you think? Then we spent time with our key HIV leaders from across the federal government. Many people are familiar now with Dr. Fauci, but those level of people across the federal government said, what are the opportunities and how can we focus? Our strategy was really intended to say, we're not going to tell you everything we need to do. What are the most important things we all need to collectively do? And we tried to boil it down. Since then, I've been gratified that, during the Obama administration, we released a 5-year plan. It was updated. I told the community then, President Obama promised you a strategy. He didn't promise you the next one. It was because of the success that it was updated. In the Trump administration, we got the Ending the HIV Epidemic initiative, and Harold had a leadership role in that. And then we're gratified when President Biden both reestablished the Office of National AIDS Policy, but also committed to updating the strategy. But each of those things have been important milestones, and it's been an iterative process. And I would also say that in addition to enacting the Affordable Care Act, the science has brought us forward dramatically. We didn't have pre-exposure prophylaxis when we released the first strategy. We have that now. Now with these new treatments that are available, these longer acting products, I think we're giving people more options, which is, again, the next big step that could help leverage further progress.
Jeffrey, I really like how you spelled everything out, because it reminds us that there's been so much progress that really has been made, like you said, whether it's the science or just the outreach within the communities to get where we are right now. And I actually want to turn to you, Harold, because when you look ahead and you look at how the strategy has evolved that you played a role in, where should the federal government's funding priority be right now when it comes to, moving forward with this issue?
That's a great question, because right now, we really need to continue to fund HIV as a public health priority in the United States. There have been some attempts by some in Congress to defund both our domestic as well as our global efforts. But HIV is such an important issue, and it impacts so many different communities. And so part of our effort has been to really try and educate lawmakers and policymakers about the importance of continuing funding for HIV. Many people don't realize that the search for a COVID vaccine is related to our HIV research. So there are spillover effects when we think about our work in the HIV realm. Many, as Dr. Gottlieb talked about earlier, sort of sub-Saharan Africa, but in the United States, Black women are a priority population in our national HIV/AIDS strategy, as well as gay men. So we really have a lot of work to do. And that work has been stalled in many cases because of both a lack of funding and a lack of education and awareness.
I want to get, kind of a final thought from each of you. As Harold, you laid that down there on where the fight for a cure goes from here. Ashley, where does it head in your view, given your testimony, and your story? What's next?
I think that we are getting closer to a cure. I do want to say that, as mentioned previously, we have really came a long way with the medication. I know when I was diagnosed, I started off on 7 pills, and now I've been down to only 1 pill a day. And now there's even an injectable available that you can take instead of taking the pills. So I think that as we continue to move forward, we're getting so much closer to a cure. And, that just gives all of us hope that we can see some of the remaining part of our life not living with HIV, but overcoming HIV altogether.
Jeffrey, bottom line, what's next?
We need to focus more on equity. HIV has always been unequal, but we have huge disparities. But we also know in like our Ryan White program, when we respond effectively, we can greatly reduce them and almost eliminate them. So to make progress for all the American people, we really need to focus on the people that have the greatest needs and are probably least likely to get the services they need.
Ashley, Jeffrey, Harold, thank you all for being here and sharing your stories and insight. We appreciate it. And folks, we're back here together in a moment. If you are feeling hopeful after our conversation this half hour, good. You should. I know I'm feeling that way. Scientists are hopeful that a cure for HIV is closer than ever. But there is one critical component here that we haven't talked much about this hour, and it's getting tested. The CDC recommends everyone aged 13 to 64 get tested at least once to know their status. 4 in 10 HIV infections come from people who did not know they have the virus, and if that test should come back positive, getting on medication quickly makes a difference. Those antiretroviral therapies keep the viral load in your body low, reducing HIV-related illnesses and preventing the virus from becoming AIDS, a key word that we've heard throughout our conversation this evening. That's our part in this larger fight to cure HIV. For Scripps News Reports, I'm Lauren Magarino in Atlanta.